Hey guys, this is John, and I'm playing Shanya in the 15-minute pool on ICC. I've decided to play in English in this game against Shanya, and we'll play G3 on move 2. This is usually how I treat the English. Um, Not my idea originally. I'm borrowing this repertoire from Michal Marin, who I've mentioned before, has written 3 excellent videos on the English opening from White's point of view, and he proposes repertoire with C4 followed by G3 against most everything. So, in this position, Black has a ton of different moves they can play. Like almost any reasonable pawn move is completely playable here. Um, so we'll see what he does. Seems like he's weighing his options, or she. Could be a she, you never know. Just looking at their stats while we have a minute. 18 wins, 15 losses in the 15-minute pool. Peak rating of 1973 for Shanya. Other ratings, not too impressive, I would say. Somewhat lower than their standard rating. So C6, that indicates that they want to go D5. I think I'll play knight F3 against that. Yeah, and then if D5 I have some flexibility, I might go queen C2 just to defend the pawn. I might also play B3. Because if I castle, let's say, they could try to take the pawn and hang on to it. I'm not a huge fan of the lines for White where White just allows Black to take the pawn and then tries to play actively to compensate. Oftentimes I feel like that's not a necessary approach for White. So I'm deciding between B3 and queen C2 right now. Leaning slightly towards queen C2. I think I'll do that. Just so, as if I play B3, I'm almost committing to fianchettoing my dark square bishop with bishop B2. So I like queen C2 a little bit better because I might go D3 and then play E4 later and leave the bishop on C1 for now and try to start playing actively in the center. Maybe it can come out somewhere towards the center or the king side in the future. I get the feeling already this might be an opponent I can pressure on the clock because they're using quite a bit of time in the opening for some pretty standard moves. It's almost like they're uncomfortable in this system or haven't faced it before. So that's a good sign. Let's just castle now. I'm sure they will castle. And now, yeah, lots of options. So I could play D4. D4 is one way to play it. If I play D4, we're transposing back into like a Catalan, basically, where I could go knight BD2 and then maybe E4 to follow. I'm leaning towards that approach because it's direct, and Black hasn't chosen the most ambitious setup. This setup that they've chosen with knight F6, bishop E7, pawns on D5 and E6, I think that's better if this pawn is back on C7. Because the pawn on C6 is a little bit redundant. It is redundant. It's not a little bit redundant, it's just redundant. Because they don't need all that defensive D5. So let me play D4. And the plan will be knight BD2 and E4 to come. Notice that I want to develop the knight through D2, so I don't give them the option of grabbing the pawn on C4. If I develop the knight through C3, they might just play D takes C4 and try to hold on to the pawn. So I'm trying to circumvent that option. Yeah, knight BD7 will continue as planned. Usually they play B6 in a natural effort to play bishop B7 and then gradually open the long diagonal for the light square bishop with C5 to come. But this bishop lurking on G2 and the fact that I can very soon leave her open the center, that bodes well for my play. I wonder if we've transposed to a line that I've seen before, which is B6, E4, and then instead of taking the pawn on E4, Black can play bishop B7, intending E5, knight E8. I think that is a line. C5, that's bizarre. I'm not sure what to make of that move. It's interesting. And in a sense, both of our knights are misplaced if there's a direct skirmish that takes place in the center, because probably would rather have them on c3 to pressure d5 and d4 respectively. All right, so how do we tackle this move? My first instinct is to take on d5 and see how he recaptures. I could take on c5, but he'll take with the knight, I think is his plan. I could continue with e4, but if I go e4, they can take on d4. I'm not thrilled about that prospect. Let's say e4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, then e5 is possible. Attacking my knight, and when the knight moves, maybe d4. Could play e3, seems a little strange. Let's take on d5. We'll play to open the center. So I'm expecting him to take back with the pawn, which gives us an option of d takes c5 when we inflict an isolated pawn on their position. But how good is that? Because they can take with the knight. It almost seems like that assists their development. So maybe if e takes d5, I will play b3 instead, intending bishop b2. But then again, if I do that, they can play b6 and bishop b7 and try to develop. Okay, he takes with the knight. I have a feeling this might be one of the games where I just can't really predict what my opponent's going to do on each move. Not that they're playing bad moves, it's just not moves that easily come to mind for me. So knight takes avoids any isolated pawn business for them. Knight b4 is an annoying possibility that I might want to prevent with a3. I could play e4 directly, but they will probably play knight b4. It'd be nice to rule out that move. Yeah, a3 I think is useful, so I'll play it kind of quickly with an eye towards playing e4 on the next move when there's no knight b4 possibility. I think I might have a slim advantage because if you look at the two bishops that are undeveloped for us, it seems like my bishop will be easier to figure out than his. I want to explain why that is, but like for one thing, he can't fianchetto this bishop so easily now because this diagonal is becoming more open. He can maybe get away with b6, bishop b7, but it doesn't look good to do that with this knight being capable of being kicked from d5. He's capable of moving this knight and then trying to play bishop d7. That's kind of passive. I will just take this guy. I mean, I have the same dilemma with my knight here. A lot of the difference comes with the two bishops. Like my bishop is fianchettoed. This is a better piece than his bishop on e7. It's striking on the long diagonal, and it might complicate his task of getting his bishop out. This seems like a good move. So preparing bishop d7. My knight on d4 is undefended, so if he gets a chance, he might do a discovered attack. Like say I play e4. I wonder if he could play knight b4 then, or knight f4 even. Probably even better. So it's kind of a bummer. I might have to expend a tempo solving that knight issue. And he's going to play bishop d7 and get coordinated. Rook d1 I could play, but I don't want that knight undefended for much longer. So I'm thinking about where I can move this knight. I can play knight f3. This is true. Knight f3, he'll go bishop d7 most likely. Maybe knight e5 then. Trying to fight for two bishops, but he has bishop a4, b3. Problem is, if he gets bishop d7, he's all primed to play rook c8. That move is coming fast. So knight 2 to f3, bishop d7. I don't know. Maybe just e4 then. Rook c8, queen e2, knight f6, let's say. Yeah, we might have to settle for something like that. Hate to do it, but otherwise, he's going to complete his development anyways, and I really need this knight defended. So, some misgivings about having to play this move because it blocks my light square bishop, but it's alright. It's not too bad. So bishop d7, I'm thinking of playing e4 to eject the knight from the center. Again, I'm kind of shutting down this diagonal for the bishop, but I don't know how useful it is on g2 anymore with him having completed his development. A lot of the value of this bishop was associated with trying to inhibit that development or even pressure d5, but the character of the position has changed over the last couple moves. So rook c8, I'm going to go to e2 with the queen. And then after knight f6, probably play something like bishop f4. And look to centralize my rooks, or maybe play knight e5. I think I have a slim advantage. It's one that I'll have to manage correctly so it doesn't disappear. But it seems like I have a more comfortable position, let's say. His pieces are still a little cramped. And I hope that translates to something tangible. After he moves his knight, like knight f6 is kind of forced here, isn't it? Knight doesn't have any other safe squares. But after he moves his knight, bishop f4 is a nice move to prevent queen c7. And if he can't play queen c7, he can't fully coordinate quite yet. I could maybe play rook d1 too to x-ray his queen, but if rook d1, he has queen c7 anyways. And then if bishop f4, maybe bishop d6. I have knight takes e6 then. Maybe rook d1, queen c7, bishop f4, queen c4 is an option. Yeah, so I think preventing the whole bishop queen c7 plan is a better idea. So we'll play this. He can play bishop to a4 to prevent my rook from coming to d1, but I do have b3, kicking that bishop away. He can play knight h5 if he wants to kick my bishop from f4. But knight h5, I'll probably settle for bishop e3 and try to prove that this knight is offsides somewhere down the line. Actually, that's probably a reasonable continuation for him. Knight h5, bishop e3, queen c7. Looks okay. His knight's misplaced, but if I play rook c1, he can go queen b8. It might be all right. He needs to do something about this bishop. I don't think this bishop can sit indefinitely on f4 in his current position. It's too strong on that square. So I predict knight h5. If he plays some indifferent move, I'll probably play rook d1 next move and just ratchet up the pressure. More heavy firepower down the d file. Maybe knight e5 is prepared. So let's think if knight h5, bishop e3, queen c7. I said I was thinking about rook c1, so rook c1, queen b8. How much does that help me? Maybe knight b5 then? Probing his queen side, my bishop would hit his knight. a7 is a little bit weak. It's something I could see him neutralizing though. Like maybe he trades on c1 and then brings the other rook over to c8 and just starts swapping, inducing mass exchanges. I would bet dollars to donuts that knight h5 is the key move in this exact position though. I think if he doesn't play that move, he might be in for some suffering. Maybe he could play it on the next move, but the problem is, like, what useful move does he make otherwise? He needs to do something with his queen to connect his rooks. That's the missing ingredient, so... And queen e8 is not going to help. Maybe something like a6 is kind of useful, but... I think he really needs knight h5. Well, even if he plays knight h5, it's nice for me that he's thinking for so long to find such a move. That's what's tough about this time control, even 15 minutes. Those of you who play Blitz, 15 minutes will seem like an eternity, but you'll always adjust your play to the time control. Or at least you will if you're a smart thinking player. And with 15 minutes, you can afford to make some longer thinks on critical decisions, but if you spend too long like he is on this move, you can find yourself in trouble very quickly on the clock. Yep, he found the move. So I'm quickly going to play this. What about knight c4? I didn't even see knight c4 until now. Mistake by me. I should have seen that move. Well, if knight c4, I'll probably... I kind of want to retain my dark square bishop, so I might play bishop c1. Maybe bishop d2 was more accurate. Then if knight c4, I could play bishop c3. Weird. Yeah, I should have seen knight c4, though. Then he's keeping his queen back on d8, but if he gets my dark square bishop, it'd be worth it to him to do so. This knight is loose on h5, so it's natural to look at tactics like involving moving this knight to attack that knight on h5, but the problem is I don't have any devastating knight jump I can make that would be a useful discovery on the knight on h5. Yeah, I think knight c4 would be indicated right now. Knight c4, let's say bishop c1, queen c7, or maybe queen b6 even. Probably queen c7. Then I think I would play b3. Say knight back to b6. Bishop b2 or back to e3. I don't know. Okay, if bishop c1 is e5 a problem? Nah, not an issue. Let's continue playing fast. By playing fast, I can also sell to him, make him think that I actually saw these moves. Not that that matters much, like just a bit of psychology, but... And I don't actually recommend that. I think it's a mistake in a position where you're unsure what to do and you've missed your opponent's move that they just played, to try to respond quickly to like somehow convince your opponent that you actually saw their previous move. That's a mistake, so I don't want to give the impression that you should do that. But in a position like this where I'm pretty safe and the clock is increasingly becoming an important factor with every passing second, I think I can do it. The important thing is the position is safe for me. I'm not taking a risk by playing a move like bishop c1 quickly. In my mind, that's just an almost necessary move if I want to aspire to any advantage. Yeah, he's just taking too long. I mean, 3 minutes, yeah, your position might be okay, but you're really cutting it close on the clock. So I think I'll play b3, just kick his knight back. b3, knight b6, maybe bishop back to f4 after all. First, we need to eject this knight. I don't want that knight on c4 much longer. Knight d6 will lose a piece to e5, so he can't play that move. Knight a5 is kind of silly, so I think knight b6 is what he should do. Maybe this wasn't so bad for me because b3 rules out any chance he has to use a4 for one of his minor pieces, like his bishop, for instance. Also, with the knight on b6, like I have an eye towards playing a3, a4, a5 to kick the knight. I mentioned this before, but knights that are on b3, b6, or on the king side, g3 and g6, are subject to attack from rook pawns. So like a4 is a definite possibility. I might play it here. a4, queen c7, a5, the knight has to go back to a8. It's not appetizing. What about rook d1 as well? Rook d1, and if queen c7, bishop f4, that's a little bit different because notice that he doesn't have queen c4 anymore. Aha. Light bulb. Rook d1. Because if I play bishop f4 directly, he might just go knight h5 again. Back to that same square as earlier. All right, rook d1, let's do it. Let's make it happen. X-rays queen. You guys have seen me do this many times, X-raying a queen with a rook. I talk about it almost every time it happens. All right, now we get this move in. E5 doesn't work because I have two minor pieces guarding that square. Queen c3 seems dangerous. I don't know if he wants to just dive into the heart of my position with his queen like that, kind of aimlessly, unless there's some specific threat associated with it. Like, just off the top of my head, queen c3, bishop e5 looks testing. And he's hiding back on d8. Okay, that's a good sign. That's a great sign for me. All right, now, how to make this as unpleasant as possible for him. Sounds like such an evil thing to say. Knight e5. Knight e5 attacks d7. d7 is very solid, though. The thing I like about knight e5, however, is that there's no knight h5 to deal with. My queen would cover that square. Okay, let's do it. This may not be the best move, but it's a quick move. It keeps him under pressure. If I am reading his feeling for the position right now, I think this is a move he doesn't want to see. I think he's uncomfortable with the bishop on f4, and I think he wants to go knight h5, so that's why I like this. He can't do it. And I think it's just a strong move overall. That's the main thing. And I keep my options, like a4, a5, for instance, or another option I've thought about is doubling on the d file. Just trying to bear down on the bishop on d7. I wouldn't be surprised to see him play queen e8 in an effort to try to shake the d file pressure. Interestingly, if he plays queen e8, I wonder if I can go g4. Idea of g5 to trap his knight. Okay, this move looks like a shot in the dark. Again, just as I was saying with queen c3 a moment ago, I don't know that you want to do this move if it's not associated with a threat. He's not threatening to take on b3 because my knight covers that square. I think he's trying to get his queen over, like queen c8, maybe. So, what to do? Knight b5. Maybe drops the b pawn. I could go knight c4 if I want to attempt to cut off the rook's retreat, but that seems, I don't know, an overreaction maybe. a4, just going for a5 is certainly possible. Knight c4. Knight c4 might not be bad. Let's say knight c4, knight takes c4, b takes c4. You can go queen c8 and try to attack c4. Maybe. Queen d2. What does queen d2 do? Attacks the rook, but again, queen c8. I think he's fiending to play queen c8. Back to looking at knight b5, but yeah, it just drops that b pawn, though. It's nothing. What about g4? Attacking on the king side from the other flank. g4, let's say queen c8, g5, knight e8. That gains some space, but perhaps nothing else. How about bishop d2? Is this my bishop really doing anything on f4 anymore? Bishop d2, maybe intending, like if the rook moves to play bishop a5. Kind of weird, but maybe ties him down. Not completely happy with any move I'm seeing here. What about a4? Trying to goad him into playing a5, and then I go bishop d2. That would be more subtle than playing bishop d2 directly. Let's do that. I really think rook c3 is just a convenience move to try to go queen c8. When I play a4, again, I'm kind of playing off of chess psychology, but when I go a4, he knows I want to go a5. So he doesn't have much time. He's going to be looking at a5 himself. Okay, to his credit, he didn't blunder that. If I play a5, though, he's relegated to knight a8. That can't be a fun move to make. Let's do it. He's at 45 seconds. Bishop d2, and is he running out of squares? He has c7 to go to, I suppose. Knight a8, maybe knight takes d7, intending knight takes d7, knight b5. Maybe. He could take on b3, but I can win a7 or play rook c1. Rook c1 is probably good here, too. No, I like taking on d7. Let's eliminate that light square bishop so I can get control over b5. So now do I want to play knight b5? He is threatening e5 here, although e5 could be met by knight f5, attacking his bishop if necessary. Bishop h3 could be a nasty move for that reason. Oh, that looks like a lot of fun. Bishop h3. Then I'm threatening knight takes e6. Maybe this is a cool move to pinpoint the weakness of this square. Yeah, and he reacted understandably with that. But here I can take on e5. I can also play knight f5. Which is better? I can also play knight b5 too. That attacks the rook and hits d7. That actually looks like it's going to win a lot of material. Let's do that. He has rook c2 though. He did have rook c2. Might not have been an accurate move by me. Let's just take this guy first. Again, he has rook c2 though. But the time is such an overwhelming factor right now. It hardly matters as far as the result of the game, but I would have liked to play a more accurate move there. Just king g2. He's down a full rook now, so... Yep, forfeits on time. Okay, let's have a look at that. So English with g3 on move 2. And c6 on this move is a little strange. I don't like it because it's not so flexible. I actually had an opponent do this against me, OTB, and not exactly this position, but they played c6 thinking they needed extra support for d5, but in my opinion, that's just a loss of flexibility because if you play d5 right away, I mean, I'm not going to win a pawn by taking. So if you know you're going to advance d5, why not do that first? Play the move that you intend to play anyways first, and then maybe you can push your pawn to c5 instead of c6. Like, why put all your cards on the table at once? Put all your eggs in a basket. You can maintain flexibility. So I can also castle in here and just pitch the c4 pawn and play for compensation, but I always feel more comfortable when I'm playing like queen c2 or b3 to defend c4. So d4, knight bd7, knight bd2, going for e4. As I said, I remembered a line like b6, e4, and now instead of taking on e4, which kind of allows white's pieces to become active, instead of that, this move bishop b7, seemingly allowing e5 winning space, but then going knight e8. And black will soon post a rook on c8, opposing white's queen. And black has a very compact position. It's not a simple position to prove an advantage in for white. If this is the line I'm thinking of, then there's some theory associated with this line that I don't really recall. I think white wants to play this position sort of like a King's Indian attack, move this rook, and then play for knight f1, possibly h4, knight h2. But, as I said, black is putting a rook on c8 and probably breaking with c5, so there will be things to contend with and think about in the center and on the queen side. So he played this this very interesting c5 move, and I'm curious what the engine thinks I should do in this position. It might even like c5. It does. Stockfish approves of c5. It seems to me like a inconsistent move, given his play in the opening earlier. I took, it says rook d1 is okay, maintaining flexibility. All right. You know, I mentioned that if I allow him to take on d4 and I take with the knight, like maybe he can play e5, but I do see now that I have knight f5 attacking the bishop. And these pawns might just be weak in the center, as it turns out. There's not enough development behind them to support them. So I took, and I was expecting pawn takes, but he took with the knight. Yeah, and I played a3. I'm clinging to a tiny advantage right now. Not much, if at all, according to the computer. Maybe knight e5 is better. Yeah, and I thought a little bit about knight 2 f3. I probably had one of my longer thinks of the game on this move. About, minute and 45 seconds. But I just wasn't sure how to kick this knight out of the center, yet keep this protected, and also keep the diagonal open for my light square bishop. I think all those goals are inconsistent with each other, so I'm going to have to forego at least one or two of those goals. But knight 2 f3 looks like a good move because it defends d4. You know, if I play e4 right away, he does have a knight move like knight f4, attacking the bishop on g2. So that's no good. So knight 2 f3, he played bishop d7, I went e4. Yep, he gains a tempo with rook c8. I put the queen on e2. Here. I went bishop f4, but yeah, given the fact that I missed knight h5, bishop e3, knight c4, maybe it would have been better to do rook d1 in view of that nuance. Because that's one of the other moves I had mentioned as being possible. Then if queen c7, now bishop f4, and bishop d6 can be met by e5. The first time around, I think I was even looking at knight takes e6, which is also good, but e5 is even more obvious, I think. Just forking the bishop and the knight. And we have e5 triple protected, so he can't capture on e5. So bishop f4, he went knight h5, I dropped the bishop back to e3, and then knight c4. Ah, e5. Yeah, e5 is interesting. Do you guys know why e5 is a tempting move for white? If you want to, you can pause your recording and try to figure out why the engine likes e5. And then I'll explain why I think that's the case. Okay, I think the engine likes e5 because it helps to strand this knight. You know how he's kind of going back and forth with this knight to harass the bishop and make sure it can't stay indefinitely on f4? Well, this move is directly aimed at that knight on h5. So now I'm threatening to play g4 and trap it. So he'll have to go through some contortions to save it. Like the engine's line is knight takes e3, queen takes e3, g6. Trying to bring it back through g7, but clearly that route is not Black's plan A. Let's say, you know, he didn't want to have to resort to this. Okay, so e5 would have been interesting. I was very attached to my dark square bishop. I didn't want to give that up, so I played bishop c1. He dropped it back. I played b3. I think this is a necessary move in order to kick his knight away. You know, that's interesting because the engine wasn't saying that I have much here after bishop c1. It was originally like 0.00. But then you just play the top moves of the engine as he happened to play knight f6, and I played b3 in here, and then rook d1 opposing his queen. And all of a sudden we're at almost +1 now, flirting with +1 territory. So I think that indicates that there's some deeper difficulties with Black's position and their coordination than the computer can foresee at first glance. That first algorithm crunch. Yeah, bishop f4, and he went back to d8. It's an unfortunate move for him. But bishop d6 fails for the same reason, e5. And queen c3 is kind of a blank. I mean, I speculated that bishop e5 might be good against that. See, bishop d2 is also possible. So yeah, he has constant problems with this queen, but where to go. So here, knight e5. It's interesting how white's advantage just grows and grows. Yeah, a4. So I found some good moves at this point in building up my advantage. As I said, knights that are on squares like b3, b6, and g3, g6, they often get attacked by rook pawns. This is a known positional device. In fact, I have a book by this guy Brojnik. Forgot the name of it. I actually have it right here. It's on my bookshelf somewhere, but I don't see it. Techniques of Positional Play. That's what it's called. Techniques of Positional Play by Brojnik. Very good book. I would recommend it if you're interested in improving your positional play. It's kind of a higher level book, so I'd recommend it for more serious players, I'd say. If you're a beginning player or relatively new to chess, I wouldn't pick that up quite yet. But in my opinion, it's a great primer on positional concepts. Lots of key positional concepts are elaborated upon in that book. So that was where I picked up that that rule about attacking knights on b6 and b3. I mean, I intuitively kind of understood that, I think, prior to reading it, but having read that book about a year ago and actually seeing it on paper that, oh yeah, knights on those squares get attacked by rook pawns, that made it more clear to me, and now I look for it all the time. Yeah, he's just got big problems. I mean, it may not be a stretch to say white is just winning now after like a4. My piece coordination and, excluding the time even, I think the piece coordination and just the massive amount of threats that can happen if black's pieces get displaced a bit more, that does black in. And I took on d7, and here I played bishop h3. The computer likes knight b5. Yeah, that was one of my ideas as well. And if knight takes a7, okay, attacking the queen. And notice that the queen cannot go to b8 because of the bishop. I like bishop h3, though, because I felt like I was putting my bishop to work since it was blocked by the pawn on e4, and I'm threatening knight takes e6, followed by f takes e6, and then bishop takes e6, check, and picking up the knight on d7. Here, okay, yeah, and clearly I didn't play the strongest move here. I mean, I got a little bit sloppy just from a purely chess point of view right now. I looked at his time and I saw he had 17 seconds left, and I honestly tuned out a little bit, and I just played moves that looked strong because I knew that my position was close to winning, and I knew I was going to win on time regardless. So, but if this were a longer game, I would definitely be thinking here. I'm smelling lots of blood in the water right now, and so should you. So be looking for stuff. So bishop takes d7 is the engine suggestion. I assume after this, I was thinking it was going to want to go knight b5 to attack the rook and discover to attack the queen. But it just says bishop takes e5. It's strong. Yeah, that's a testament to the coordination troubles that black experiences here. The fact that I can just calmly take a pawn. I'm only up one pawn, but the engine thinks it's over +7. That's amazing. And it's black's move. Yeah, that means his pieces are really poorly placed, and he's not able to cope with all the threats, even with a tempo available to him. Like one line the engine gives is rook c8, and now bishop takes g7. And if king takes knight f5 check, just wins the queen. So everything is falling apart for him. I guess that's a little subtle, I mean, that sequence. Still, I think I should have come up with something more testing. I mean, even the immediate bishop takes e5 is good because he's pinned, which I did see in the game. I got kind of carried away with this one, but he has rook c2 against this if he wants. He'll still come away with a lost position more than likely, but yeah, like here, rook c2 was necessary to counterattack my queen and simultaneously save his rook. And I see the engine is suggesting bishop takes c8, rook takes e2, bishop takes b7. I'm up a solid 2 pawns. His knight is trapped. a7 might be a goner. His pieces are still scattered. It's basically over, but there's still some work to be done. But the time really did him in. Let's just look at his time purely. where he spent all the time. I think that knight h5 move really cost him. Yeah, so he spent about 6.5 minutes on that move. No, I cannot math. 4.5 minutes on that move. No, 3.5. I definitely can't do math right now. In my defense, it's kind of late at the moment. But yeah, he had, let's say, 9.5, and he's down to 6 after that. So 3.5 minutes. That's a little bit too long as we're getting to the middle game. Prior to that, he was doing okay on the clock, I think. But looking at it from his perspective right here, I don't know. I think knight h5 is basically necessary in this position. The computer disagrees. It says knight a4, but if it were me, that would be like the very first move I would think about. Because how are you going to coordinate if not for knight h5? What are you going to do about this bishop? This bishop has to go. Otherwise, your queen is not getting out anywhere. But I see knight a4. I mean, that's interesting too. Intending to go to b6, actually. Because if b3, then the knight can come into c3. Interesting. Okay, well, I hope you guys enjoyed this game against Shanya. And let's just, before we log out, let's just check the 15-minute pool. I'm at number 3. Super Chin-Chan. I don't know who this guy is. This is a very good standard player, apparently. It's quite a high rating. Not so many other good ratings, but that's a high rating. And then there's Gore, who is an IM who's very good at standard. You can see his record is a pretty strong one. 227 wins and 22 losses only. So, still looking to play him sometime. Well, thank you guys for watching, and I'll be back tomorrow with another standard game. Please leave me any feedback in the comments. Talk to you guys later. Bye.